The fluorescent lights flickered above the emergency room, casting a sterile glow over the cracked linoleum floor. I could still hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall, the one that spat out stale chips for $1.50. My hands gripped the thin hospital blanket, my knuckles pale against the faded blue fabric. I was 17 and the doctor's words were still ringing in my ears. Lila, it's lymphoma. We need to start treatment immediately if we're going to beat this. My heart thudded, not from fear, at least not yet, but from the weight of the unknown. I looked at my parents, expecting them to say something, anything to anchor me. But my mother, Ellen, just stared at her phone, her manicured nails tapping the screen. My father, Greg, stood by the window, his back to me, shoulders rigid like he was holding up the weight of the world. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, kept talking. Words like chemotherapy, prognosis, and insurance pre-approval floated past me, half understood. Then she said the number, $120,000 for the first phase, maybe more. My mother's head snapped up. That's not possible, she said, her voice sharp like she was scolding a waiter for a wrong order. We've got other priorities. Nathan's internship in D.C., the new office expansion. We can't just... She stopped, glancing at me, then away like I was a math problem she didn't want to solve. I waited for my father to turn around to say, "We'll find a way, Lila." But he didn't. He just nodded, still facing the window. "Alan's right," he said, his voice flat. "We've got to think about the big picture. Nathan's got a shot at something real. We can't risk that." I blinked, my throat tight. "Risk what?" I croaked. "My life." My mother sighed, tucking her phone into her purse. "Lila, don't be dramatic. The doctor said there's a chance it could stabilize on its own. We'll pray on it. God's got a plan." She stood, smoothing her skirt. My father followed, his eyes still avoiding mine. They didn't hug me. They didn't cry. They just walked out, their footsteps echoing down the hall like a door slamming shut. I stared at the empty doorway, the 4 needles stinging my arm. A nurse came in, her sneakers squeaking. "Sweetie, are your parents coming back?" she asked, her voice soft but practiced, like she'd seen this before. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. She hesitated, then left me alone with the beeping monitors and the weight of their choice. They hadn't just left me in a hospital bed. They'd chosen Nathan, my golden boy brother, the one with the debate trophies and the Ivy League dreams, over me. I was the spare, the afterthought, the girl who got B's instead of A's, who read poetry in the library while Nathan charmed scholarship boards. But something else stirred inside me, a quiet spark in the dark. They thought I'd fade away, that I'd accept their verdict like I'd accepted every other slight. The forgotten birthdays, the hand-me-down clothes, the way they'd beam at Nathan's speeches but forget my poetry readings. They were wrong. I wasn't going to disappear. Not this time. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, I made a promise to myself, whispering it into the sterile air. This isn't over. I'm not done. I didn't know how I'd survive or what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let their choice define me. Something was coming. Something they wouldn't see until it was too late. The next morning, the hospital social worker, a man with a tired smile and a stack of forms, sat by my bed. "Lila, we need to talk about next steps," he said. "Do you have anyone else? A relative, maybe?" I thought of my parents' house in suburban Chicago, all polished hardwood and framed photos of Nathan's achievements. There was no room for me there, not anymore. But then I remembered Aunt Clara, my father's sister, the one they called Flaky, because she lived in a cluttered apartment in Evanston and painted murals for a living. We hadn't spoken in years, not since my parents cut her off after she called them out for favoring Nathan at a family barbecue. But I remembered her laugh, warm and unfiltered, and the way she'd slip me extra cookies when no one was looking. "Clara Evans," I said, giving him her name. "She's my aunt." He nodded, scribbling on his clipboard, and promised to call her. I didn't expect much. For all I knew, she'd moved or she wouldn't care. But an hour later my phone buzzed. "Lila, oh my God, I'm coming," Clara's voice crackled through, breathless and fierce. "Stay put, kid. I'm there in 20. When she burst into the room, she was a whirlwind, paint-splattered jeans, a messy bun, and eyes that looked like they could burn through steel. She didn't ask what happened or why my parents weren't there. She just crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped her bag and pulled me into a hug that smelled like turpentine and lavender. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her voice steady. "We're figuring this out." I didn't cry. I couldn't. But I felt something shift, like a locked door creaking open. For the first time in years, someone saw me, not as Nathan's shadow but as Lila, the girl who was still here, still fighting. Clara sat with the doctors, her notebook open, jotting down words like oncologist and clinical trials. When they mentioned the cost, she didn't flinch. "I've got savings," she said. "And I know people, artists, community folks. We'll crowdfund if we have to." I stared at her, stunned. She barely knew me, yet she was ready to upend her life for mine. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered later when we were alone. She looked at me, her eyes soft but fierce. "Does your family, Lila. And nobody gets to write you off." She handed me a sketchbook from her bag, its pages worn but empty. "Start writing or drawing or whatever you do," she said. "It'll keep you grounded." That night, as Clara slept in the chair beside my bed, I opened the sketchbook. I didn't draw. I wrote one sentence. "They think they've erased me, but they're wrong." I didn't know what it meant yet, but it felt like a seed planted in the dark, waiting to grow. I thought of my parents back at their pristine house, probably telling their friends I was fine, or handling it. I thought of Nathan packing for his internship, oblivious to the cost of his spotlight. And I thought of something else, something I'd overheard at a family dinner months ago. My parents had been pitching their consulting firm, Evans & Company, to a big-name client, someone who could make or break their reputation. They'd bragged about their family values and commitment to education. It was a lie and I knew it. But did their client know? As the hospital machines beeped softly, I closed the sketchbook and stared at the ceiling. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something better. A reason. My parents thought they could walk away, that their choice would stay buried in a hospital room. They didn't know I was already rewriting the story. And when the time came, they'd see me, not as the daughter they discarded, but as the truth they couldn't outrun. The story's getting more and more interesting, isn't it? Don't miss out on what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Let's see what other challenges await our hero. The air in Aunt Clara's apartment smelled like acrylic paint and coffee, a mix that clung to everything. The mismatched cushions, the thrift store bookshelves, the canvas leaning against the wall with half a mural of Lake Michigan. It was a far cry from my parents' polished suburban house, where every surface gleamed and every photo was staged. I'd been living with Clara for 3 weeks since my discharge from the hospital, and her place felt like a sanctuary, chaotic but warm. My room was a corner nook with a twin bed, a quilt she'd sewn herself, and a window that let in slants of morning light. Taped to the mirror was a post-it note in her loopy handwriting. "You are enough." I read it every day, sometimes twice, like a prayer I was learning to believe. My body was still fragile. Chemo left me nauseous and my hair was thinning in clumps, but I was alive. Claire made sure of that. She drained her savings for the first round of treatment and set up a crowdfunding page that raised enough for the next. She didn't talk about it much, just shrugged and said, "Artists stick together." But I saw the late-night emails she sent to local galleries, the flyers she posted at coffee shops, the way she'd barter her paintings for grocery discounts. She was fighting for me in a way my parents never had, and it made the ache of their absence sharper but also easier to bear. I spent my days following a strict schedule. Meds at 8 a.m., protein shakes Clara insisted on, rest when I felt dizzy. But in the quiet moments when she was out teaching art classes or I was alone with my sketchbook, my mind kept circling back to that hospital room. My mother's voice, crisp and final, "We can't risk that." My father's silence, louder than any words. And Nathan, my brother, who hadn't even called. I'd seen his latest Instagram post. A photo of him shaking hands with some senator, captioned "Future starts now." No mention of me, no hint that his sister was fighting for her life. It wasn't just that they'd chosen him. It was that they'd erased me like I was a typo in their perfect story. But erasure works both ways. They tried to write me out, but I was still here, holding a pen of my own. And in the back of my mind, that seed from the hospital, the one I'd planted with that single sentence in my sketchbook, was starting to sprout. I didn't want revenge, not exactly. I wanted truth. I wanted the world to see my parents for who they were, not the glossy image they sold through their consulting firm, Evans & Company. They'd built their brand on family values, coaching wealthy kids into elite colleges, promising integrity and sacrifice. But I knew the truth, they'd sacrificed me. One afternoon, while Clara was at a community center teaching kids to paint, I sat on her sagging couch with my phone. I scrolled through my parents' company website, all sleek fonts and stock photos of smiling families. There was a testimonial page, glowing reviews from clients who called them life-changing and trustworthy. My stomach churned. Then I saw it. A banner at the top, proud partners of the Vanguard Education Fund. The name rang a bell. I'd overheard my parents talking about it at dinner last year, how they'd landed a contract with Margaret Voss, the fund's director, a woman with connections to every Ivy League admissions office in the country. They'd called her their ticket to the big leagues. He trusted them, others would too. I opened my sketchbook, flipping past poems and doodles to a blank page. I started writing not a plan but fragments. Hospital bill. Denied. Nathan's internship. Their choice. Then a memory surfaced. A text I'd seen on my mother's phone months ago when I'd borrowed it to call a friend. She'd been texting Nathan. Lila's fine, focus on your application. We can't afford distractions. I'd screenshotted it, not sure why, and buried it in my camera roll. Now I dug it up. There it was, timestamped the day after my diagnosis. Another text from my father to a colleague. Lila's situation is under control. Let's keep the focus on Nathan's DC trip. My hands shook as I read it. They hadn't just walked away. They'd rewritten the narrative to protect their image. I didn't know what I'd do with the screenshots yet, but they felt like keys to a lock I hadn't fully understood. Margaret Voss didn't know the truth about Evans and Company. She didn't know the family she'd partnered with had left their daughter to fend for herself. But what if she did? What if the right person saw those texts? The hospital's denial of care letter I'd found in Clara's files. The social worker's report noting parental non-involvement? The pieces were there waiting for me to put them together. Clara came home that evening, her hands stained blue from a mural project. She set a bag of takeout tacos on the table and grinned. Spicy or mild, kid? She asked. I smiled, choosing spicy, and we ate in companionable silence, the radio playing soft jazz in the background. She didn't ask about the sketchbook I'd left open or the phone I kept glancing at. But as we cleared the plates, she said, "You've got that look, Lila. Like you're planning something." I froze, then laughed, the sound surprising me. "Maybe I am," I said. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, she handed me a paintbrush and a canvas scrap. "If you're scheming, do it with this," she said. "Art's better than anger." I took the brush, but my mind was elsewhere, spinning with possibilities. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was focused. Over the next few weeks, my strength returned bit by bit. I started helping Clara with her art classes, passing out supplies to kids who painted with more enthusiasm than skill. Their laughter was contagious, and for the first time I felt useful, like I was part of something bigger than my own survival. I began writing poetry again, short verses about light breaking through cracks, about roots growing in hard soil. Clara read them and taped her favorites to the fridge, next to her grocery lists and doodles. "You've got a gift," she said one night, her voice quiet. "Don't let anyone make you hide it." Her words stayed with me like a lantern in the dark. I'd spent so long shrinking, trying to fit into my parents' narrow vision of worth. Nathan was the star, the one they'd pinned their dreams on. I was the shadow, the one who got "good try" instead of "well done." But here in Clara's cluttered apartment, I wasn't a shadow. I was Lila, and that was starting to feel like enough. One evening, as rain tapped the windows, I opened my laptop. Clara was asleep, her soft snores mixing with the storm outside. I pulled up the Vanguard Education Fund's website and found Margaret Voss's email in the contact section. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't want to scream or accuse. I wanted to be clear, surgical, like a blade cutting through lies. I started typing. "Dear Mr. Voss, I'm Lila Evans, daughter of Greg and Ellen Evans. I thought you should know the truth about the family behind Evans and Company." I didn't finish the email. Not yet. But the words felt right, like the first step on a path I couldn't see the end of. I saved the draft and closed the laptop, my heart steady but racing. What would happen when I hit send? Would it change anything, or would it just be a whisper in the wind? I didn't know. But as I lay in bed listening to the rain, I felt that seed from the hospital growing stronger. My parents thought they'd closed the book on me. They didn't know I was writing a new chapter, one they wouldn't see coming. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving Evanston's streets slick and reflective under the pale November sky. I sat at Aunt Clara's kitchen table, my laptop open, the draft email to Margaret Voss staring back at me. I'd rewritten it a dozen times over the past week, each version sharper, clearer, more precise. No anger, just facts. My diagnosis, my parents' refusal to pay for treatment, the screenshots of their texts, the hospital's denial of care letter, the social worker's report. I ended it simply. "I thought you should know who you're partnering with." My finger hovered over the send button, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about letting the world see the cracks in my parents' carefully polished facade. I took a breath, clicked send, and closed the laptop. The seed I'd planted in that hospital room had grown, and now it was out of my hands. Clara was in the living room, sketching a mural design for a community center. She didn't know about the email, but she'd sensed something brewing. "You okay, kid?" she called, her voice muffled by the soft scratch of charcoal on paper. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," I said. "Just figuring things out." She didn't press, just hummed and kept sketching. That was Clara, always there, never crowding me. I wondered how I'd gotten so lucky to have her, when my own parents had walked away without a backward glance. Weeks passed and my life settled into a rhythm. Chemo sessions left me drained, but I was gaining strength. Walking farther, eating more, laughing easier. I started tutoring kids online, mostly math and English, for families who couldn't afford private coaches like my parents' clients. It wasn't much, but it paid for my meds and eased the guilt of Clara's stretched budget. The kids reminded me of myself. Quiet, overlooked, eager for someone to notice their spark. One girl, Maya, sent me a poem she'd written about stars hiding in daylight. I told her it was beautiful, and her grin stayed with me for days. Tutoring wasn't just work. It was proof I could build something, that I wasn't just surviving but growing. I didn't hear from Margaret Voss after the email, and I didn't expect to. But one morning, while scrolling through my parents' company website on a whim, I noticed something missing. The proud partners of the Vanguard Education Fund banner was gone, replaced by a generic tagline about educational excellence. I checked the fund's website. Evans and Company had been quietly removed from their partner list. No announcement, no fanfare, just a clean, surgical cut. My heart thudded, not with triumph but with a strange, steady calm. It had worked. The truth had reached someone who mattered. The fallout was quiet at first, like ripples spreading across a still pond. A few client testimonials vanished from my parents' website. A local high school canceled a workshop they'd booked. Then a bigger hit. A college prep expo dropped them from their speaker lineup. I didn't gloat or post about it. I just watched, my laptop screen glowing in Clara's dim kitchen, as the empire my parents had built on lies began to crumble. They tried to pivot. New branding, a flashy newsletter, a video of Nathan talking about family legacy. But the whispers had started. Clients asked questions. Schools hesitated. The phone stopped ringing. By spring, I was stronger, my hair growing back in soft, uneven patches. I could walk a mile without gasping, and I'd started painting with Clara, smearing colors across canvas with no plan, just feeling. She'd laugh and say, "You're a natural, Lila." I wasn't, but it didn't matter. Painting was freedom, a way to spill my thoughts without words. One evening, as we cleaned brushes in the sink, she said, "You're different now. Lighter. Like you're not carrying their shadows anymore." I nodded, realizing she was right. I'd spent so long trying to fit into my parents' world, to be enough for them. Now I was enough for me. Then came the mentorship conference. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about overcoming adversity, thanks to a recommendation from one of my tutoring clients' parents. I stood in a community center auditorium in Chicago, my voice steady as I talked about resilience, about finding light in dark places. The audience, educators, social workers, students, listened, some nodding, some taking notes. I didn't mention my parents or Nathan. I didn't need to. My story was mine, not theirs. As I stepped off the stage, my hands still shaking from nerves, I saw them near the exit. My parents. Ellen's hair was grayer, her blouse wrinkled. Greg's tie was loose, his face lined with exhaustion. They looked smaller, like the weight of their choices had finally caught up. "Lila," my mother said, her voice thin. "Can we talk?" I stood still, my arms crossed. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone even. We made mistakes," my father said, his eyes darting to the floor. "The business is gone. The house is in foreclosure. We saw your name on the panel. We didn't know you'd come this far." I tilted my head, studying them. "You didn't know because you didn't care," I said. "You left me in that hospital bed. You chose Nathan's future over my life." My mother flinched, her eyes wet. "We were scared, Lila. We didn't know what to do." "You knew," I said, my voice cold but calm. "You just didn't choose me." They stood there, silent, as people milled around us. My father cleared his throat. "We're struggling. We thought, maybe you could help. Just a little." I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. "You couldn't afford to save me," I said. "I can't afford to save you. I turned and walked away, my steps steady, my heart quiet. I didn't look back. That night, Clara and I sat on her apartment's tiny balcony, sipping chamomile tea. The city hummed below, all lights and distant horns. She didn't ask about the conference, just handed me a blanket and said, "Proud of you, kid." I smiled, pulling the blanket tighter. "They tried to erase me," I said almost to myself. Clara squeezed my hand. "They failed." Life didn't become a fairy tale after that. There were still chemo side effects, bills to juggle, nights when old wounds ached like bruises. But I wasn't alone. Clara was there, painting murals and sneaking me extra cookies. My tutoring grew into a small program helping kids like Maya find their voices. I started a fund in my name, not for spite but for protection, to ensure no kid had to beg for survival like I did. On Clara's birthday, I surprised her with a weekend trip to a cabin by Lake Michigan, paid for with my tutoring money. We sat by the water, wrapped in scarves, watching the waves. "Where to next?" I asked, grinning. She laughed, her eyes bright. "Somewhere with sun and no schedules." "Deal," I said, and we clinked our mugs. In that moment I realized I hadn't just survived. I'd chosen who I wanted to be, not for my parents' approval, not for their regret, but for me. And for Clara, who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd loved me when I was unseen. Hey everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Revenge Tempest channel. If you love this story, please hit that subscribe button and join our amazing community. Drop a comment below letting us know where you watched us from. Your support keeps us going. Stay tuned for more epic tales.